Hello, everyone. Welcome to what I've dubbed for tonight the Telling Tales TTRPG Podcatastrophe. Name under consideration. So, what is this, and what's going on, and what's going to happen? Should you be afraid? I wish I had the answers to all those questions, and I wish desperately that my cat had not chosen this very moment to start tearing apart paper behind me. But we are where we are. 2021's an absolute asshole, and we're just all going to have to deal with it. What we're doing is we've gathered various Telling Tales people here, and he'll said alumni, which would imply that they'd gone on, like graduated to Critical Role or something. And we're going to talk about some tabletop RPG news, some releases that are coming up, some articles. We're also going to then take time to discuss some talking points and get into the meat of some little special questions we have a bit more, which sounds terribly intimidating, but I assure you it's going to be hilariously messy. So yeah, let's briefly introduce the people around the table. Above me, we have John, best known as the Telling Tales person, who's on every single stream this week in one form or another. 5 days of streaming for John. So yeah, if you are Telling Tales regularly, you don't know John by now. I don't know where you could possibly have been.
To be fair, for at least 2-3 of the weekly streams, I do just lurk in the background.
That's true. It's true. But your presence is always there. Speaking of people whose presences are always there, let's go around clockwise. We've got Steve. Hello, Steve.
Hi there.
Steve plays in Call of Cthulhu at the moment, stream manages on Tuesdays, and does a bunch of other stuff as well. Then moving on from Steve, light world of difference away, let's talk about Stephen. Stephen, regular viewers might not recognize Stephen because I don't think anything featuring Stephen has yet gone out, but Stephen's going to be playing in our Coriolis game that's starting next week, at this time, yes. And a regular on Wednesdays from here going forward, hopefully. So yeah, that's Stephen. And below me, we've got Justin. Justin doesn't matter very much. Of course he matters very much. How are you tonight, Justin?
I'm well.
Yeah.
It's a nice warm day.
Yeah. I mean, the flip side of that, I suppose, is if you ask me, I'd say it's a horrible nice day. Because I was out in town for 2.5 hours after being indoors for most of a year and a half. So yeah, tough. I am overheat. I'm very possibly going through heat stroke. So this should be
good.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we've got Alex. Alex is one of the stars of our crossover Fetters of Stone streams with the Free League Twitch.
I'm gonna make sure that goes right to my head hearing that. Just
good.
Like straight to my head, ego just through the roof now.
Well, we are a podcast comprised entirely of seven white men, so ego should be an absolute hallmark of what we're doing here.
Oh, I failed up to get here,
yeah. Yeah. So, and finally, but not firstly, we have Chris, my long-time YouTube companion. How are you tonight, Chris?
I've certainly been worse.
Good. I am glad that this isn't the worst night of your life, because that would be an embarrassing night to be doing anything podcasts.
Give it time.
Give it time, absolutely. So yeah, like I say, what we're going to do first off, we're going to run through some vague news stuff and just have a bit of a chat around that, and then we'll move on to releases and articles, and then probably the meat of the podcast, which is talking about things. And tonight we've got things about systems we've recently been playing. We've got RPG bucket lists. We've got talking about the first systems we ever played. All that entertaining stuff you'd expect, again, from a 7 white guys podcast, mainly talking about our own experiences. Where are you going to get white men's experiences anywhere else?
I'm sure they'll be different from all of the experiences of other people.
Absolutely.
In this hobby.
Yes. Definitely. Setting ourselves up to fail. I love it. So, yeah, we've got a few bits and pieces of news to talk about. The first one I picked out, and I've read about this for the first time, and I'll show little links while we're doing this and credit where I read these things. And first off, we'll pop it here. Yeah. So, Gen Con, bizarrely, is happening this year in a physical manner. and it's happening as part of a dual presentation. There's an online component, but there's also a physical component, and they pushed it back to autumn, I think, unless things have changed since I read this, which might have been. So it's still going ahead in Indianapolis, as it always does. But a few people, Asmodee and Paizo are the big names, although Paizo, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Pathfinder people, have we got Pathfinder people here who can help me with that? No.
Played it once, but 15 years ago.
Well then, they're out, which leaves big gold gaping holes. And I think, don't ask me for confirmation on this, but I think Fantasy Flight Games may also be pulling out that. I guess the news here isn't so much maybe that those guys pulled out, that Gen Con is going ahead.
Yeah, a lot of stuff is going ahead, though.
Yeah, it seems bold.
Don't like it.
It seems like a bold step. What do we think? Do we think the time has come to step back into these things?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I suppose that everyone who goes is an adult, and if you aren't aware of what is, I'd hope, everyone who goes is either adult or accompanied by their adult, and if you're not aware of what the precautions are that you need to take in order to stay safe at massive gathering, probably not very well social
massive indoor air-conditioned gatherings,
then I'm sure there'll be signs up. So I mean, I wouldn't be going to a massive convention anytime soon, but
I mean, they don't have
vaccinations,
the best sort of, the Gen Con flu is.
He's already notorious.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
Like, it seems to me like there's a lot of talk in the media at the moment. I don't necessarily want to get talk about broader subjects on this.
RPG, not a global.
Yeah, it's I'm not saying we can't have those opinions, but like it seems to me like there are such things as vaccine passports, but they're problematic in their own way. Like literally today, I was in town without a phone, which I would normally have. But my phone was busted. But plenty of people maybe can't afford phones or whatever, and therefore can't have a vaccine passport. And I wanted to go eat a burger, and I couldn't do because I didn't have that. Fortunately, I then had one later and have just eaten it. But that's not the point.
That's not the point.
These things, are an unintentional way of gatekeeping as well as for rational reasons. So.
I suppose we'll have to see. Well, it'd be interesting to see what kind of precautions they want to put in place, like whether you're going to need to have taken a test beforehand or anything like that. I don't think that it going ahead in and of itself is too problematic. I think that, especially we'll see if they're going ahead in spite of like, say, if there was an outbreak in the local area or something, or if there were no precautions. But I think at the moment they haven't really released as much information on what precautions are going to be taken.
No.
And potentially there might be some that mitigate the worst of the threat.
I mean, maybe it's difficult because there's still quite a time frame to go before August and autumn, rather.
Yeah. Could go either direction.
Or things can change significantly, as we've seen, right? So,
I mean, as a business, I guess they have to try. They can't just screw it.
Yeah,
stop.
Yeah, it's not exactly a hobbyist endeavor at Gen Con anymore, is it? It's there's money there, so
yeah.
There we go. Links to that. Sorry, John, carry on.
I was going to say there's going to be plenty. If this isn't, they've pushed it back to autumn. There's going to be, or fall, whatever. There's going to be plenty of, I guess, litmus test events before then. Because I know here in the UK, download is going ahead, which is like in the next couple of weeks, and it's being used as like a massive test, basically,
to see for people outside the UK is like a metal festival here.
Yeah, well,
it's a big festival. The point being,
stretching the term metal, am I right?
I think that John's right. There are lots of tests. Well, I think like people who want to go, who are maybe watching this podcast or looking back at it, might have a look, have a think, But I think everyone's an adult is going to have to make their own decision on that one.
Yeah. I think we're reaching, and this is stretching beyond the bounds of this podcast, but we are reaching an odd time where it's like personal responsibility is starting to come into play again. It's like, are you vaccinated? Well, you probably can't carry it to any significant degree, so you're probably all right going.
We do not provide medical advice.
We do not. We don't do that. We don't do that. So, speaking of these things, one thing that has come out of the last couple of years for obvious reasons is an increase in online conventions of various kinds, whether they come as sort of just kind of big packaged news drops or something actually more interactive and more interesting, to be honest. And there's a couple of them that have come to our attention. For a start, we've got Renegade Game Studios, who are a company who have basically recently taken on the mantle of developing for Vampire the Masquerade in the absence of Modifius's work, because they were fired. And also Onyx Path. I don't know if Onyx Path are going to do more, but Renegade are doing the next big supplement, which we'll talk about later. But they've announced the Elysium Weekend of Darkness virtual event, June 11th and 12th, and they're talking about the board game they've made and Vampire 5th Edition and stuff like that. And have a bunch of stuff on. And similarly, we've got Onyx Path, who I just mentioned. They've done Vampire the Masquerade stuff, but they do a load of other stuff as well. And they've got their own virtual gaming convention as well, which looks like it has loads of kind of like, what would you call them? Like groups of people talking about things.
Panels?
Podcasts like this. Panels. Panels and announcements and all sorts of stuff like that. And I guess we don't really have any opinions on virtual events we haven't been to yet. But what do we think about virtual events? Has anyone here been attended one of these online conventions for role-playing stuff?
Well, I would like to chip in and say that I think it's tantamount to the absolute failure of capitalism as a system, that when I started role-playing, we had the world of darkness. Now we only have the weekend of darkness.
We're not going to get political.
It's the weekend of darkness. June the 11th.
But I would like to plug Communism, the role-playing game, though. It's great. You all start out with equal resources, just some are more equal than others. It's a really just class act rule set.
Yeah, I believe it's based on Animal Farm. That fairy tale novel with no meaning or subtext.
I think that the different, it's important to recognize that there are differences between online and real world events, and that they do online events have their strengths, but they really need to be anticipated by the people organizing them. So lots of things, all of us know, we'll have experienced work things shifting online, work like meetings or conferences or those kinds of business gatherings shifting online, and it really the success of those really depend on whether or not the organizers understand what the platform is they're using and what the benefits of it are, and realize that they can really completely restructure what they offer because there's a completely new platform to do that on. And so the things that work in person no longer work, but things that you couldn't do in person, you now can do. And so really I think an online convention could go really well, but it has to be organized by people who really understand the internet, the risks of doing things online, the risks of, bombing, video calls, but equally the benefits of platforms like Discord and things like that to kind of bring people together. Yeah. And also critically to allow for admin and banning and all that kind of stuff to really make sure that the conversation is all on above board and all the rest of it.
Yeah. I think the word really here is community, because that's ultimately what conventions are about. It's about building community. And it's really difficult to do that online unless you know what you're doing.
I mean, one thing that I find really interesting is normal conventions, they are very kind of quintessentially a human activity. But the interesting thing about online conventions is it's an emergent space. The tools, I mean, we're 2 years into my lockdown at work now, and the tools we had to deploy kind of marketing things like come and look at our products when we started versus what we have now, it's like looking at the Enterprise C versus the Enterprise D. It's just worlds apart.
Weird, isn't it? When things are made to happen, they actually start moving.
Yeah, but I think I want to know where, let's assume that some force keeps us online for a time longer. I want to know what the next stage of the evolution of these online meetings, these online festivals, these online events can happen, because it's not going to be video sharing forever. And
Yeah.
it's going
No.
to start, I think, looking a lot more like a video game, and I'm here to see that kind of thing happen.
Yeah, like a level of interactivity. Like, two things weirdly occur to me from this. One is that I think generally considered poor showing. I think it's not entirely tabletop RPG, not since the 80s, but Games Workshop had a like an online festival convention thing, I think a couple of weeks ago, and basically all they did was each day they did news drops of like new miniatures and stuff, and it's like that's just a content drop. That's not, you know, a convention or whatever. And the other one is, and I'm willing to bet that Steve will know the name of this game. There was a game made in the last year or so that was essentially a demo convention for one company's games.
Oh, Devolver Digital, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
And you could like
If you'd got that
roam
wrong.
their like convention floor and play demos of all their games as part of the experience. And if you do something like that, MMO style, and you can go up and watch another person playing the game, and you can have interactivity, and maybe they drop sort of even Twitch player style features into it, you know, of like so there's a thing in Vermintide where the viewers can vote on what monster they want to appear and stuff like that. If someone can implement that, more difficult to see how you could do that for TTRPGs. I guess you'd get a bunch of like tabletop streamers to like do games that everyone can interact with of the company's things.
What I'm hearing is
something like that.
got ideas for a convention.
Yeah, come to us. We've definitely got the talent to implement it.
I actually missed the event itself because I think we were busy doing something amazingly because it was during lockdown. But there was Thought Bubble Festival, which is like a comics and role-playing games and board games thing, up north.
North of
I'm
England.
never going to say that again.
I think they do run.
We
one
can clip
in
it, it's
London
fine.
as well.
No, we can't. We're live. But yeah, their convention hall was a series of web pages strung together, kind of like not quite like a point-and-click adventure. It wasn't quite use rubber chicken on diversity panel, but it'd be like there's a thing of the convention, like a map of the convention hall, and then you click in each bit and you go to a different room, and it's more exciting than the other conventions I've been to, which is basically just a day-long Instagram stream.
Better than a conventional convention.
Yes,
I mean, conventions.
easier on the feet.
Conventions are definitely about more than what happens up on stage, right? Like they're about being in a space, like I guess conventionally, like a physical space. But you know, we have the technologies to build these kind of online spaces now, and I think we will see more and more of that because even if this whole pandemic thing blows over, like there's something to be said for having these online presences, right? Like I think there's a bunch of people in the world that are probably a bit afraid to go outside, for one thing. You instantly break through an awful lot of accessibility concerns, and geography no longer matters, right? You can have people come and join you from, you know, as far and wide as they want to come from.
And,
right?
and like with like online tools, like language barriers drop as well. And frankly, anything in the next 20 years that reduces the amount of air travel people decide to take is probably going to be a bonus.
It's more than just a stopgap for this couple of years when we can't go out.
I agree.
It's got
couldn't agree.
advantages.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that obviously that stretches to things beyond this podcast, like home working as well. Like I'm genuinely hoping, if anything good has come out of the last couple of years, it's a sea change in how we think about how we use the internet.
I know that Epic are they're thinking of Fortnite now as more of a, rather than just a game, they're trying to push it in the direction of being a virtual
metaverse.
Yeah.
Concerts and stuff there for ages.
It's just a big type of marketing.
I just liked my survival
Safe,
fort
yeah.
building zombie killing thing.
Yeah, but that's because
Fine.
you're
And they
that's because you're
pivoted.
basically a boomer, Matt.
Past the certain
You know, it's not
Yeah,
for you,
boomers
mate.
are all about that.
You're only
Fortnite.
out by 16 years, Justin. But yeah,
I know, but I'm getting called a boomer at work. I've got to cut my digs in it sometimes.
Sure.
But yeah, I think it's not really meant for us, and I suppose we probably wouldn't get it. So
No, that's fair.
Even so, though, it's not really about the. Sorry, go on.
No. On the crucial topic, tabletop role playing topic of Fortnite and who should be playing it. Let's move on to the next thing. And I did interrupt Alex, but he can say what he wants because he's also about to introduce the next thing. So, Alex, tell us about the Circle of World Builders event.
I don't think this was.
Oh, I think
Was this not Alex?
I could stay quiet about this and let.
But
let
I'm just gonna I'm gonna vamp for a little bit here and just pad it out.
Sure.
It's a fantastic event.
Sorry, I thought it was you. If it was someone else,
It was me.
Okay, go ahead, Steve. Then go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so this is just something I saw in the last couple of days, and again, it's an online event that's free for people to attend. It's basically a free one-day course for seasoned and new games masters, basically covering how to create a campaign for any system or setting without being boring, they say, which I could probably benefit from.
The tagline of how not to be boring is a bit too real for me. Also, I see World Anvil is sponsoring, and they're like heavy hitter for people who like kind of multiple linked list world building tools, which are really kind of fun.
So
also, bold of you to propose something that's happening on the same day as my Expanse one shot. Thanks for that.
It happens if you wrap things up by 5 p.m. You're fine.
We're up, lads. A 2-hour one shot. We can do it.
All right, let's go.
But it's a one-day thing, so yeah. Anyway.
It genuinely blows my mind as someone, and this will be a topic that frequently comes up as a role player from the 90s, that there is a thing like an online one-day course for role playing, kind of world building focused on role. Like, that blows my mind that there is something like that. Although I have to admit, and this is me exposing my worst side here, there is always a part of me when I see things like that, and I see other things like people kickstarting how to do this or what the best. There's always a part of me that's like, and this is horrible, that's like, how do I know that you know more than me? In a way, because this is a topic in which there is no, official marker of expertise. You can't go into the role-playing degree. Please let me teach that. But it's just one of those things where I'm always like, it's just, how good do you think you are? Well, then you'll do it. I don't know. I'm sure they're great. I'm not bad mouthing them. It's just an instinctive reaction I always get.
I mean, you're not the target market. I absolutely am, and would love to have gone to that were it not for me being in space at the time. But for people like me who can work their way around a system but can't really tell a story, stuff like that is really vital. And stuff like that is I want it. Give it. Put it in me.
I need the opposite. That's what I need.
I've always been
rules.
Because I also love World Anvil as just a concept. It's one of those kids' toys that I wish I'd had growing up there.
Yeah.
But I've always felt for game masters, there's, as has been said for authors, there's architects and there's gardeners. And I've always been on the gardener's side, where you let the thing evolve and you only do the narrowest part of it and you just let the world fill itself in as the characters expand and you don't dwell too much on the stuff. And this is for the architects, which I've never been able to get my head around, who need everything mapped out and just have the encyclopedic knowledge of every last detail before you begin. And I'm not that person, even though I would like to be at times, because I always feel like, if I forget a crucial detail and then it's contrabanded later by some other thing that I said was canon, it's now undone. But I'm staggered that there's enough desire to have that ready to go before you jump in, and that there's tools to do it even.
And I mean, I just don't know how anyone has time for it. Quite honestly, I really don't understand. If I can get a quarter of an hour before a session to put some story together, I can probably put some time into designing an asset for a story, or something like that. There's we'll talk later about the campaign that I'm running with Steve in it, and that for me is at least relaxing and fun. But to design the story, Like, where do you have the time to update these sheets? I can't.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
What do you do when you're bored? When you're just walking somewhere and
I have
you need
literally
to think
no
about
time.
something and you're really excited about that role playing system and ooh, what about that thing?
Walking
Like,
where?
Yeah.
I'll use that time. I'll write down like plot details, like a thing. Oh, it's going to be this twist and it's going to be amazing there. But it's chicken scratch on a piece of paper that I do, again, 15 minutes before the session. And it's funny because everyone in my offline group is pretty much new to the whole idea of this. And they've basically grown up in pandemic times learning it. So they only know the online stuff. And they're convinced that I have this encyclopedia under my desk of every last detail of the world. And they have no idea how much has been pulled out of my backside. So before they took their turn at DMing, they would write 20 pages of story Bible. And then they would use maybe a 50th of it in their session. And they had to have that hard reckoning of all that prep just going right down the toilet.
It's
I
stuff
think
like that.
part of it is I think part of it is knowing enough that you know that you don't need to go off and prepare everything in advance. Like if you get past for me, I'm still at the stage where I'll freeze up if somebody asks, "Oh, what color is that?" or "Why is that there?" and I'll suddenly go off and sort of like this sort of crash zoom of, "I don't know. Why is that there? Is that consistent? I should have thought about." And then boom, and everything's dead.
Yeah, a kind of moment of narrator. Steve did not know.
Steve regrets his choices. So if you know enough and know enough tricks to kind of just bypass all of that, then you're home dry. And I'm in favour of anything like that people can watch that can just sort of take away some of the mystique or just get them thinking about how to do things quickly. There's a chap called Sly Flourish who does basically how to GM with no prep, his whole shtick is that you really don't need to do much. Here are some key things. Just come up with a few secrets, understand your characters. Have a good start, and then off you go. So there are definitely ways to approach it where you can just minimize the prep.
Yeah, they're absolutely. I mean, I think this is definitely a bigger discussion we could have as a sort of special topic another time. So let's move forward and talk about the next news item. Ooh, things to choose from. Here we go. Now, this is something I will have virtually nothing to say about at all, but I'm hoping in this group we have at least one person who watches it. So Critical Role recently finished their second campaign finale. It seems impossible to me that they're only on their second campaign, given how long they've been going. It was 7 hours long and represents, I think, 2 or 3 years of... here we go. Here's some information. 530 hours of adventures, 440 villains conquered. I've got to believe that's like groups of 10 orcs at a time and stuff. 100 hours of battles. I don't watch Critical Role, and I won't say anything negative myself. I have watched bits of it. It's not for me. That's fine. But I'm going to share a comment that someone made, and this does not represent the views of Telling Tales or of Matt from Telling Tales. But I did see a comment saying if there were 100 hours of battles and 530 hours of adventures, that only leaves 430 hours of Matt Mercer doing silly voices. I'll just mention that because I thought it was funny.
He's a professional voice actor, Matt. Leave him alone.
Sure.
Leave him alone. Leave Matt Mercer alone.
It's his thing. No, that's cool. They're very good at what they do. Who here watches Critical Role? Does anyone here watch it? Do we have anything to say on the matter?
I have always intended to start watching the Vox Machina campaign, and I've never gotten around to it.
I can't.
I think I will.
Nope,
Sorry,
Alex, you go.
I did the same, Matt, and it's not for me. And I think what did it for me was to me it felt very much of real play as entertainment and trying to. It would put in shipping where I didn't know that it necessary there. And I think, Matt gets a lot of credit and where it's due, but he's also around people who are, for better or worse, paid to be there, and they just go off and sort themselves out for a good hour or two without him having to say so much as a word. And I've never been at a table where that happens. Everybody just, needs a bit of the game master to keep things moving there. And it felt it felt performative, and it felt just not the thing that I grew up with, because I too am an old man who just likes a story that moves along and feels like what we used to do. And where there have been entertainment podcasts or shows that have done well, they either lean really hard into telling a story, which is less about player agency, but at least moves it on rails to do so, or it's a real play thing and you just put up with the dice rolls that don't really translate particularly well, but at least it's authentic. And Critical just kind of hit a medium that I didn't felt was my thing.
Yeah, I think sorry, Chris. I just want to say I roughly agree with that. But just to briefly counterpoint it, again, as many of us are role players from the 90s, what a fucking achievement to have what is essentially a long-running television show of people just playing role-playing games. Like, again, 90s me, amazing stuff. Chris, sorry, you were saying.
I think it's there's what I thought initially was kind of a binary situation between playing around a table, which is a small group for entertainment, to playing on a stream, which is a performance for an audience. I'm starting to see that more as a spectrum. And when you look at Critical Role, you're seeing the far end of that spectrum where these people are very, very well, very skilled entertainers. But they're not, I'm not sure how much, I don't think it's play in the same way that we play when we're in our parents' basements with a load of takeaway and that kind of stuff.
And unless we take that, again, I guess a rough counterpoint, Critical Role has probably done more than anything else in the history of role-playing to bring people into the hobby.
Yeah.
And I am, there's a lot of people who would not like that, but I am most certainly not one of them. The more people who enjoy this wonderful thing we do, the better. And that is to absolutely be applauded, and it's a hell of an achievement, whether it's for you or not. Stephen, were you going to jump in with something?
I was mostly just going to agree with you. That it's just wild that this hobby is a thing that has managed to somehow produce stars, essentially. I could never have predicted that.
No, absolutely not. And it's obviously they've come to it from the angle of voice actors, improv people, stuff like that. But still,
whose line is it anyway? But with dice.
Yeah, basically, amazing stuff. So well done to them, which I'm sure they'll love. Oh, thanks, Telling Tales. Yeah. So the next thing, and speaking of acting and things like that, yes, it's a tenuous segue. So the showrunners of Shadow and Bones, which is the latest Netflix big old fantasy-ish thing, who I believe also did The Witcher as well, are developing the World of Darkness for TV and film next. Will it be wonderful, or will it be Kindred the Embraced? A TV show, if anyone remembers, from the 90s, where I'm from, based on Vampire the Masquerade, which was like every other genre show from the late 90s. Literally last night I showed John the intro cinematic to it. God awful. I
would like to give context to this, though.
Can you please?
Matt showed it to me because I idly went, I think I want to watch that to see how bad it is. And Matt was like, let me talk you out of it by showing you the terrible intro. I'm like, this did not work. I just want to watch it more.
It's the Star Wars Christmas special, but with dice.
Yeah. But with fangs. Yeah.
I don't think I would absolutely love to see a single World of Darkness property make it into a different media and do well. And I don't really think we've seen that yet. I mean, the first video game was grand, but everything else has been stuck in development hell, or terrible, or tenuous, or
there've been a couple of decent video games of various sorts. Obviously, Bloodlines is not. In fact, the first one, Revelations, was the first Vampire the Masquerade game, but Bloodlines is excellent. And nothing good on Kindred the Embraced, which I think only lasted 7 episodes or something like that.
8.
And was not
8 episodes.
John's like, I'm going to watch all of them.
It just feels like. It really feels like World of Darkness is really desperately looking through the playbook of how to transition media and has decided to pick the method used by Games Workshop. And no one can stop them.
Well,
there's definitely
funny you
some
mention
shareholders involved, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do we
mention that.
expand this intellectual property?
Yeah, funny you mentioned Games Workshop because they've recently launched like an animation app that they're doing, which like making money off fans' work. But yeah, this is interesting. Look. As we will establish over time, if we do more episodes of this, I am absolutely a massive fan of the World of Darkness and like the storyteller system and all that stuff. If they did it and did it right, it would make my life. I would have at least as much wrapped up into that as I do with the Netflix Sandman adaptation, which I am anticipating and dreading in equal measure.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good.
I don't know if it is.
You've been let down by the Watch series too hard.
I was let down by Good Omens too hard. Yeah, take that, fans.
You're just burning bridges today, Matt, with abandon. It's like just taking napalm to all them bridges.
That's
Burning
not tonight,
bridges with the
Justin.
industry.
That's
Yeah.
every
David
day.
Tennant canceling his appearance on the next episode right now.
I am a professional bridge builder. Bridge burner, not builder. Yeah, I would be delighted to see this. And there's more talk we could do about this. Maybe we could do a thing where we have a talking point. We bring on a bunch of people who are into World of Darkness, talk about the kind of things they'd want to see. But yeah, it's interesting.
Do you think it would translate well to like a non-interactive medium though? Like we know it as a tabletop game. Like it's had a couple of kind of video game sort of adaptations, which at least were like they're interactive. You can be involved in that. I love World of Darkness too, but like for me, I'm like, is there enough there that I could kind of be behind a sort of screen and watch it and feel as involved?
It's super-powered, sexy vampires. What is not to get involved there?
I think, assuming they do vampire, which of course they will, but I think there is, because it's an incredibly rich and deep world, and it's always been kind of very narrative heavy and character heavy. And I think there is that. Of course, it depends what you do with it and whether you write it well and present it well. I think visually, if they nail the visuals and the atmosphere and the sound and all those kind of things, it could be really good. It could essentially do for the 90s what Stranger Things did for the 80s.
Whoa, big talk. My question is, though, because I was racking my brain about this, has there been an IP that started as a game and became a film or television show that has worked? One.
Tales from the Loop.
Yeah,
The
Tales
Witcher?
from the Loop. Well, technically, Tales from the Loop just started as art. But yes,
True.
Tales from the
Why
Loop is
not,
probably the only one.
Why
The
not
Witcher started
shoot-
as books, didn't it?
Why not tune in this Saturday and see another one? Because The Expanse started as a game,
The Expanse started as an
transitioned
RPG.
to
That
a
is
book
true.
series, and
That
then
is true.
rotated back to a television series.
Yeah,
so,
I am a fan of
this Saturday,
television
everyone.
show. Yeah, okay, that's fair. But
And you'll be very surprised. Well, you won't be at all surprised to hear, but like the number of authors of books who credit their worlds as starting from their Dungeons and Dragons games things. I'm thinking particularly Remedy
that's true.
Feist. And so that's kind of a Dungeons and Dragons transitioning into a fantasy setting, transitioning into maybe further media beyond that. So
I think
I
Laurel
can grant you
K.
that.
Hamilton credits her writing to unspecified role-playing games, but probably Vampire the Masquerade.
sorry, Alex, you were saying?
Those are games that individual people played that they then used as a thing there. But I'm wondering about properties that were publicly available as games first. CF Battleship, the film, the movie, which really just nailed that transition from game to
Seamlessly.
really just crushed it. Because I say this as a huge fan back in the day of like the Dragonlance novels, which is of course
which was just a game that they played. Yeah,
exactly. And like the game setting, the world setting did poorly, so far as I know. But the novels I devoured. I love those, and they were far more interesting to me. It wasn't the game. It was their private game that became that.
There's literally a point in those, and it's fascinating learning about that years afterwards, because I didn't pick up on it when I read them at the time. And there's literally a point in it where a character dies, and the reason the character dies is because their player moved away.
Yeah.
But in the context of a novel, that's fascinating. Yeah, but anyway, it'll be interesting to see. We'll see. We'll see. The only other thing we've got on the news, and this doesn't really need to be talked about, and it isn't promo, we're not sponsored, but there's a hell of a good little Humble Bundle at the moment that you might want to avail yourselves of. Tales from the Loop. Speaking of a good, what a natural segue there.
Hello
to me. And Simbaroon, you can get a whole bunch of these PDFs for so little cash. People might want to be interested in that. Charity, innit? Charity.
For God's sake, someone run Tales from the Loop. I just love that world, and I want to see how the game runs.
If I could run everything for you, Chris, I would.
That's
my weird power ballad.
There.
Well, Chris, maybe you should consider subscribing to our highest Patreon tier, and then you can get Matt to run a custom game for you and some friends.
Yeah, lucky
Literally
you.
paying
want to pay for that. Literally pay to play. That's it. So I think we need to jump a bit ahead for our own purposes. Let's have a very quick run through some of the highlights of the releases or pre-releases out this month, just because it's interesting. John, I think you posted this one, although you weren't the only person to post it to our Discord, I have to say. Why don't you just introduce us to the concept of Fiskborg, please?
So it's Morkborg with fishing mechanics. That's it. That's all you need to know.
That's great.
Fishing
so moving on.
Everything better.
that is literally it. Fishing mechanics and aquatic horrors.
There's nothing
that
I think of as more closely associated with the art of fishing as metal music.
Absolutely, yes. You think metal, you think fishing. It's a natural combination.
I can't help myself want to play that one though, just because just to be able to say that I have,
Yeah, I played the Doom Metal Fishing Simulator. Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that's come out, I don't think it's out physically, but the PDFs are out, and I know our very own Steve has a copy of it, and it's the Alien Colonial Marines Operations Manual. Even as I speak those words, somewhere out there, the other Alex from Telling Tales is wetting himself that someone has even spoken those words. Steve, what have you got? Any initial impressions from browsing through or anything?
I've had a quick look. I haven't gone into too much depth yet, but it looks good. It's interesting in that it's very much a source book, and it leans towards the campaign mode of Alien RPG rather than cinematic mode. So there's a whole load of background information in there, it looks great. Same sort of layout quality as the main core book. Looking forward to
what you'd expect from Free League, really. Yeah. Again, not sponsored. We just love them. So sponsor us. The next thing we've got in here, and this is one from Chris. It could only have come from Chris. And Chris, would you like to talk to us about Fight with Spirit, please?
Oh, get in. Let's do it. Sports anime, the role-playing game. What is not to get excited about? It's a one-shot. It's not a one-shot. It's an ongoing series. 50 weeks. Let's all get down. Get your Gambate Kudasais going. This is going to be amazing.
I mean, you need to run the whole sports season, right?
I'm kind of wondering. I can't wait to get my hands on it because I want to see how much of the actual sport I can strip away. So it's literally just go sports team. Oh, he's scored a second wicket on the second half of the basketball court. I just want to take it as far away from this. I'm just excited to be.
You're actually really selling it.
If the improv is just making up rules for the game, then I would be so there. Like, just nonsense rules that everyone has to come up with and just collectively design the sport that you're playing. I'm so there.
It's just Blurn's ball from Futurama. That needs to be the key. No, Chris, a man who loves anime high school sports but hates sports. Although I may have just described everyone who loves anime high school sports.
Just I was going to say.
So there we go. That's one. And I think we have another one from you here, Chris. Maybe a bit wider appeal in this group. Let's find out. We have Wanderho.
Ah, yes. This is a very interesting GM-less game about empathy and working together as a team, not to fight any demons or evil or anything like that, but to move from one place in a healing and perfect world to a different place. It's very wholesome. It's kind of Studio Ghibli-esque. It's a little bit strange because GM-less, but not without the everyone is the GM rather than there is no GM.
Like a less traumatic Animals of Farthing Wood.
Yeah, I think that pretty much nails it. Or like any given animal-focused Studio Ghibli film, I think it's going to be a delight. I'm going to get the hard copy of it. I'm probably going to run it for some local people here to see if they want to feel joy again, maybe for the first time in decades. Who can tell?
Who knows? Yeah, and one final one from Chris, I think, although I know a lot of us are interested in this. I know a couple of us have backed it. But Chris, I think, is the one who first leapt on board with it. Death in Space.
Yeah, look at that. It's someone's. Yeah, it's there on the screen. Morkborg, Firefly, Alien, and Free League Publishing.
Yeah, and I mean it's the creators of Morkborg, so making it. So yeah, sign me up. Sign me up.
I mean, it's going to be beautiful, regardless of anything else. And honestly, the a little bit of a peek behind the scenes. The reason I'm running the Expanse is because this wasn't ready in time.
How dare they? How dare they?
Very much looking forward to taking a poke through it, and definitely I hope not to sound presumptuous, but look forward to it on a streaming roleplay channel coming to you soon.
I think so. I think that is pretty likely. We've got a couple of other things here. Let's talk about. Oh my word, that page has gone. That's fascinating. Oh, how interesting. No, there it is. It's gone back again. So let's talk. And Steve, let's pass over to you on this. We've got a new Dune thing.
Yes. So, and this is a quick start. So this is available for anybody to go off and download for free. Yeah, it's Modiphius. It's the 2D20 system, which I know nothing about, I've got to say. But yes, if you're sort of familiar with the Dune setting, it could well be something of interest. I have to say my experiences of Dune are really kind of tied with the real-time strategy game that came out donkeys years ago, which I loved.
Which I think has a relatively new printing. I think I was actually looking at it today in my friend's local game store. It's the one with the circular board, yes?
Oh, I was talking about the computer game.
Oh, Dune 2. Yeah, sure.
Battle for Arrakis, I presume.
Battle for Arrakis, yes. Yeah, Dune. It's timely, right? It's going to be out in cinemas come December, I think. Yeah, and free quick starts.
Yeah, I literally downloaded this today. Dune is my formative childhood book series, so I'm another thing I'm going to be fighting other people on this channel to run, hopefully in the future.
Absolutely, get yourself downloading it and walking without rhythm. Yeah,
to the extent I might not even. I might just stick to the quick start and fill in the rest of the setting and rules from my encyclopedic knowledge of all the doohickeys and googly booblies.
That's fair.
Vaguely off-topic question, Chris. Where would you stop reading Dune?
Great question. So the Great Dune trilogy is like the first 3.5 books. I think Children of Dune is where it stops. That's a great place to stop if you're limited on time. I'd say once again it's a spectrum. If you're feeling a bit hardcore, go to the end of all of Frank Herbert's work, and if you enjoy seeing what a person who didn't realize that his father's greatness came in part from the fact he was doing just so many mushrooms, read Kevin J. Anderson's extended universe stuff as well, which is fine, but it just doesn't have the same charm and the same 5-dimensional hypercube nonsense that's Brian so elegantly created.
I would like to mildly counter that with end with Dune.
I'm on the second book now.
Yeah.
I read the first 3 books. First one was good. Second one picked up some interesting themes. Yes. Third one, I regretted every moment I spent reading it.
Kind of like Children, but you got to keep going because it gets more it gets more surreal rather than less.
It does.
It's like Gormenghast in space, maybe.
Speaking of books, you should stop reading after a while.
Jesus.
Oh, that is not controversial, my friend. The notion of stopping Gormenghast after the second book. So next thing we've got on, and I'll happily talk about this. There's the pre-order up for Symbaroum, the Haunted Waste, also known as Alboretor, the Haunted Waste. So essentially, this is part of their massive ongoing Throne of Thorns campaign, which we're going to be running sometime soon. and each one is like a location and a part of the story. And the location for this is Alboretor, as it says, the haunted waste, the sorcerously wrecked country that almost a lot of the people in Simbroom have desperately migrated away from. So you're going back there. I cannot bloody wait for this. I'm so excited to read this book. So I thought I'd mention that. And hopefully people here who play Simbroom also are. Chris?
Yeah, so is this the fourth volume of the Throne of Thorns, or is this like a separate source book?
This is the fifth.
So technically we might run into it if we can stay the distance with Throne of Thorns.
If we all stay alive, Chris, and we all buckle down.
Because one of the things I was going to talk about is we must, for something as massive as the Throne of Thorns, we must be approaching the event horizon of longest officially published adventures for role-playing games. And I was doing a little bit of research, and I know Murder on the Orient Express.
That, weren't we? I don't know. I'm sure there must be a D&D. What's it called? 12 Rods? Is that the big D&D thing? 12 Rods of something?
Doesn't ring a bell for me.
I think that's an old one. The one that always gets talked about is Masks of Nyarlathotep, which obviously isn't that long. It's just in one book. I mean, it would be a long campaign if you run it, but it's all in one volume now. So I don't know about that. I don't know. Maybe some other people have published something else, but yeah, they're aiming to have 7 volumes in the end. So
Monty Cook has kickstarted a reprint or a redo of Tollus, PTOL. US, which is apparently that's 1,000 pages in book form. So it's quite a tome.
Ooh, I see.
There are some long ones out there. The next thing I've got, and as usual for me, it's all Free League and White Wolf. Well, this is published by Renegade Studios. It's the next volume of V5 for volume of Vampire the Masquerade V5. Use your words, Sabbat the Black Hand. They're bringing the Sabbat back, which for everyone who's interested in White Wolf and Vampire the Masquerade and all that stuff is quite the step to take. But it's controversial because they're only antagonists. There's no rules for creating and running Sabbat characters, which I'm kind of fine with because I always preferred them as antagonists. But if you're the kind of Vampire the Masquerade player who prefers being a bit edgelordy and playing a vampiric anti-hero traveling the world with their badass powers,
keep burning those bridges.
Keep burning those bridges. Oh, those bridges were burned a long time ago.
We've just lost our critical edgelord now.
For those players, those players aren't particularly happy. But let's be brutally honest, those players aren't that happy with V5 in general anyway, so maybe they should lean into what they've
maybe they'd be more happy if you made back playable characters.
I don't think it would fix the fundamental issues of the version for them.
I thought most of the problems with the version were that the Sabbat were basically written out until now, obviously.
No, their problems are a great deal of them are in how the mechanical side of the version interacts with the kind of meta plot and narrative side of the version. Essentially, it's a general unhappy. It's the general perception that it can only be run as a kind of a small scale game of personal horror. I disagree with that. I think it could easily be adapted to be otherwise, but regardless, that's how I like to run it anyway. So, so maybe it's not a question for me. Yeah, so that's Sabbat the Black Hand. We've got 3 more ones we'll run through, and you know what? I think we did have a couple of articles to talk about, but we'll skip them because honestly, they're big talking points that we could mention another time. So we'll skip them for now. Now I can't remember who was it. John, was it you who mentioned Change Stars and Into the Motherlands, or was it Steve? I think it was one of the two of you.
I mentioned Into the Motherlands.
You mentioned Into the Motherlands. Well, then why don't you talk to us about Into the Motherlands?
Okay. Into the Motherlands is an Afro-futurist sci-fi thing, and it looks really, really cool. It's written by a group of people of color, specifically for like that sort of historical fantasy tilt. There are hyena people. That's sort of what you need to know.
Okay.
The idea is that explorers from the kingdom of Mansa Musa, however many hundreds of years ago, fell through a wormhole and ended up on an alien planet. And this setting is, I think it's like 1,500 years after their arrival. So
cool.
It looks cool.
It looks gorgeous. Look at the
I didn't know about the setting. right?
Mhm.
But by its very nature, an Afrofuturist like RPG is interesting to me, especially one with like quite, because you tend to get kind of a lot of the stuff in the indie sphere, because obviously like the limits of business and publishing are much less than they are here, and things like institutional racism, structural racism don't exist as much. But having a really high-produced Afrofuturist thing is really cool. Also, I didn't know it was about Mansa Musa, who's literally one of my favorite historical figures. Just a quick note: Mansa Musa was possibly the richest man who has ever lived, and that includes modern people, by obviously standards of inflation and stuff. Was so phenomenally rich that when he decided to go on pilgrimage to Mecca and went through North Africa and the southern parts of the Mediterranean to get there, he passed out as charity on his pilgrimage so much money that he literally collapsed the economy of most of the countries he proceeded through.
He also massively funded a huge amount of like scholarly things, universities, exploration, which is where this comes in, and it's generally just a really interesting dude to read about. But to amend something you said, I think last year Jeff Bezos officially overtook him.
Officially overtook Mansa Musa. There is no justice. So, Steve,
Yeah,
were you the one? Were you the one to pop in and change stars?
Yes, I think I was. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. So again, this is quite an interesting RPG kickstarted. It did. This one's finished, hasn't it? The Borderlands one is still going. This one you can pre-order. But yes, again, so this is a sci-fi role-playing game set in a bright yet perilous future, and it's inspired by utopian feminist science fiction and contemporary gritty speculative futures. So yeah, no, it's sort of good to see a bit more variety in.
It is, and like again, what a time we live in, where crowdsourcing and Kickstarter can make this kind of thing a reality at a high production level, because again, and I realize obviously, as mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, we're definitely the group of individuals to be talking about feminism. But yeah, good stuff, looks great. And the next thing, the last thing I had here, and I'm sorry whoever suggested it, I can't remember who suggested it. The Seeker's Guide to Twisted Taverns.
I think this was me as the resident basic of the group here. This is by started by Runesmith, who, for those who follow him on YouTube, is a quite good sardonic voice in the role-playing community there. And this is sort of his second project after writing an entire source book on just companions for role-playing games and the rules around them. And as someone who, again, starts with as a gardener rather than architect and likes these small things, having settings like this, because the entire book is just crazy taverns and the adventures that can go around them. And there are wild places like, a shipwrecked tavern under the ocean, or in a giant fungus, or on a train, and the narratives that go around them. And he's had that great bit of scope creep where he's now invited musicians and cocktail experts to design recipes for the book. And there's a whole treasure hunt within the book that's very meta, and you have to look for this. There are poems and songs that go along with this, with sheet music, I understand. There's the lot. But what I love about it, beyond its just metatextuality of just throwing this all in there, is that it's just this deep dive look at just a handful of places rather than an entire huge scoped world there. And like my old crew way back when, we had this running gag that there was always a Milosh in every town that you went into, no matter what. And he always sold ribs, and he always talked like this: Milosh sells ribs, of course. And that was just a brilliant gag that we loved to have. But every group that DM played for met Milosh in a different way. And what I love about these things is they'll introduce a handful of characters who occupy that tavern, and every group who buys this will encounter those same characters and have a different weird adventure there. Yeah. And they all kind of in a quantum superposition all technically happened. And I love that.
There is always a lighthouse. Yeah. Absolutely. I just hope that somewhere in there is room for at least one tavern that has a basement area full of giant rats for you to kill.
Oh my God. How else will you make your name? How else will you make your name? Yeah.
Cool. I was for a while, for a couple of years back in the 90s, part of a fairly sort of dysfunctional like D&D group that would sort of put together these parties of like really disparate, bickering characters. And in true D&D fashion, you know, like we would meet in the tavern at the start of the adventure, and quite often wouldn't make it out of the tavern. Like there were whole sessions that were just like, and yep, we've started a bar fight. So like, I think being able to spruce that setting up a bit would bring a huge amount of game to those kind of groups.
And I dearly hope that it branches out to a number of other genre-based one. So the next one is for your cyberpunk games. Here's 50 different corporate agents with mirror shades to offer you a dodgy deal.
So into this.
Yeah, so there we go, folks. That's our news and releases roundup for this month. So let's get on to some talking points here. So the first thing we're going to talk about, we're going to go around the group and talk about what we've been playing recently, and specifically if we've been playing any new stuff or things we're interested in. And I know we've got kind of 2 or 3 of them listed here. So why don't we kick off with Steve? Because Steve, what have you been playing recently?
Well, so I've started playing as a player this game called, well, it's a campaign called the Dracula Dossier. So this is for Night's Black Agents, which is pretty much the absolute opposite of Vampire the Masquerade. It's basically if you got Jason Bourne and a number of other of that sort of ilk, Jack Ryan, that sort of character, and just had set them off hunting vampires. Now that's Night's Black Agents. That's fine. Whatever. The thing that is great about the Dracula Dossier is it's an improvised campaign, and it's set. The premise is essentially that the novel Dracula is not a novel at all. It's a censored version of Bram Stoker's after-action report of the failed British intelligence attempt to recruit a vampire in 1894.
Oh gosh.
So they've taken the novel, and they have gone through and annotated it 3 times with 3 different sort of times that's been dragged out of the vault, and agents have tried to sort of add information back in and figure things out. And then it's handed to you, and you then get to read through this unredacted, annotated version of Dracula that is absolutely packed with clues. And I've got a screenshot here I can put up. And basically, you give that to the players, and they go off and they do whatever they like with it. They find things that are interesting. They spot inconsistencies. The dates are off, for instance, between the published version and the unredacted version. And the great thing is that the campaign is improvised, so anything the players find, the GM can do something interesting with. Whether they suspect person A or think person B is an ally, you can head in that direction if you like, or you can flip it, and you can have twists and turns, and the GM is essentially in control of this huge, great, sprawling mess, and it can be driven in whichever way you like, but always in the direction of the player's interests. So having a lot of fun with that. Obviously, it's a really heavy sort of investigative game, which I love. I'm happy just staring at a book and finding out all the inconsistencies. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where that goes.
That's I could see a lot of nodding around the podcast group. That's really cool. I already knew about this, and I didn't realize I already knew about it when you mentioned it the first time, because I kind of didn't make the link in my head. Weirdly enough, another Steve told me about this. Yet another Steve number 3 told me about this. Yeah, told me about this a few years ago, and it's a really cool idea.
I remember Johnny telling me about this as well.
Well, Johnny knows Third Steve, you see, so.
Well, now who's doing the investigations, eh?
Yeah.
We could,
the whiteboard.
we're putting the clues together.
It's all connected, don't you see?
No, that's really cool.
Have you ever seen Steve 2 and Steve 3 in the same room together?
Yeah, think about it.
I mean, I've never seen Steve 1, Steve 2.
It's a whole Steve-spiracy.
The reason you can see them like this on webcam, if it pans down, it's like an undulating gelatinous mass that their torsos come out of. On the earth.
You couldn't escape one Wednesday evening without a little bit of weird horror, could you? You just have to do it.
It's a problem.
He does this even when he's not streaming.
So
Wednesday's the weird days.
So there we go. But okay, let's. That's really cool. Let's hop on to someone else's what you've been playing. Justin, what have you been playing?
Well, we've just started playing Blaze in the Dark, but you'll be talking about that shortly. And in the meantime, after wrapping up about a year and a half of Star Wars Edge of the Empire that I was playing with John, Steve, and some other people in my offline game, we just started up playing Forbidden Lands, and I think we'll be having session 2 this week. But I'm enjoying it, trying out Forbidden Lands, trying it on for size, and generally have found it quite refreshing to go to a game that encourages quite a lot of procedural generation of large aspects of the game, has some interesting ideas like the map and placing down locations of dungeons and things on this map that you're provided with, and also some opportunities for mixing that with online tools that you probably couldn't do around the table. So, for example, in the One Ring, when I was playing that a few years ago, you have a map in that you can use to travel, plan travel around from various areas, from Hobbiton to Mirkwood, etc. But the players all see that, and they will know the map, and the map is kind of a bit of a fourth wall breaking type object. But in online games, you can have, I like, for example, on Roll20, which we're playing it on, we can do things like introduce Fog of War, so that the players really are exploring the map where, as they play, and don't have to have the whole physical map out in front of them as they wander through it. So we really don't know what's on, beyond those hills over there. And that means that I like that element of it. My only real criticism is that I think that they had a really good opportunity to reinvent the kind of the Tolkien-esque division of different kin, as they call it, into based upon the hierarchical structure of all the other things. And that's really nice in some ways. It does out with the idea that orcs are some kind of a degenerate race. In this, orcs are their own, one of the initially created races of by the gods, which is nice to see, especially kind of given the general racial overtones with orcs and things like that. But what's kind of weird and disappointing is they're still a slave group, and they also they embrace that just fine. It's like the orcs are kind of described as basically being slaves. We were fine with that until we weren't. And also, they're the only racial group they're called kins, I suppose, but the only kin group in the whole thing that's the physical anatomy of them is described, and the way they are described is not really off. So I think we've rewritten that a bit. We had a conversation with the group about that because it was just not really comfortable with this. But apart from that, I'm glad to see that the reinvigorating some of the tropes, and obviously generally the Free League style, which we're all big fans of, produces a lovely system.
The two touch points I'd have from what you just said is the way Forbidden Lands operates is very similar to Mutant Year Zero in the filling in of the map, and we had a recorded game of Mutant Year Zero that we never actually put live on the old channel, which may eventually be going live on Telling Tales, maybe even later this year, and then continued in some format. And we had that thing of the map almost become the way the map is a prop, essentially, and we had it so in the group one of the characters had the map and was responsible for placing warning stickers and stuff on it of we don't go here, this is full of horrible mutant raiders or whatever, and all this kind of thing, and that really, and I found myself creating the story in partly a procedural way, but also the way that the map unfolds and the random nature of it meant that I couldn't get out of doing my prep beforehand, but I'd create it randomly, and then it would as it unfurled, it would be and this could be there, and it kind of all created this narrative in front of me. The only other thing I'd say that I mostly agree with how it's oddly rigid to those fantasy tropes, apart from I love how the halflings,
I knew you were going to say
goblins
that,
are handled in it, because it's amazing. It's awesome when you read it through the first time, and spoilers if you'd skip ahead a couple of minutes if you don't want to know this.
Steve, don't listen to this.
Should I not mention it?
No, it's fine.
Okay. So basically you read the section on halflings, and it's like, oh, the halflings, like, are these happy people who are in this Shire-like setting, but then it like paints a picture of a
bit of a dark side of them.
Yeah, the happiness is actually this kind of like, oh, mustn't grumble sort of thing, and there's actually all this horrible darkness and the usual horribleness of actual family life and all the things going on. So they're more like an actual repressed Victorian society that the Hobbits kind of emulate in that kind of Edwardian way that was originally intended. And then it talks about, for example, like about 1 in every 3 Hobbit children is born kind of badly. They have genetic abnormalities or something like that, and they're just left and exposed in the woods because the woods are full of nasty creatures, and they're better off that way. And it's presented this horrible thing, and then you read the goblin entry, and all the goblins are just the babies that the halflings leave in the woods.
I think you're misremembering it a little bit, but it's even worse. It's a bit different, because what it says, and maybe it's a difference in the editions, the printing editions. But in the printing edition that I have, it is that I actually don't think this is necessarily the best way that they could have handled it. But the way it's described is that the goblin and halfling women have no control over whether their children are going to be goblin or halfling. So they take them to some kind of like group. They kind of go on a retreat to give birth, and then it's like a kind of like all they'll gather in one place, and then they just and they could give birth to a halfling or a goblin, and they take home with them the one that is either the halfling or the goblin. Sure. Depending on, but the point is, and then what is nice is the goblins have no shame about this. They're like, yeah, great, we're goblins. Everyone hates us. Like, we're not going to get hung up on this whole thing of being associated with halflings. They're fine, whatever. And the halflings are like, fuck you goblins. Yeah. We don't know who the fuck. I've never seen this person in my life. Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about.
Like these shameful monsters in the woods, sort of things, where the goblins actually, I think it mentions at various points that they actually kind of protect the halflings' lands and allow them to live this sort of like restrained pastoral life. But yeah, it's I think that's really interesting. Like that's a whole.
It is a good way of doing it, and it's good because like it does, like goblins, and I know this is a boring conversation, but like fantasy tropes of goblins and orcs. It's always kind of like, why are there goblins and orcs? What's going on here? They're not really fleshed out. But this is quite nice because it goes, no, goblin and orcs are very different things. Orcs are this, servitor race that has had an uprising, whereas goblins are just like carefree, weird halfling, like different things that don't care about it. They're like pretty chilled out. And they're definitely the most chilled out of all the races.
More to the point, you can literally start as a character who's a goblin wolf rider, and yes. So, what else have people been playing? Well, I've been playing Blades in the Dark. You may even have seen it. We streamed it last night. Justin and John were in it, and Steve was stream managing it. Blades in the Dark. Obviously, this came out a couple of years ago now and kind of shook up the RPG industry a little bit with really interesting new ways to kind of go about role-playing games. I don't want to get into it in too much detail because I feel like it's a thing that could massively take over the time we have left. But fundamentally, it's kind of it almost becomes a semi-procedural game style that's operating in a cyclical fashion where you take on scores as a crew of criminals in this sort of quasi-Victorian fantasy city, and then you play through those scores. You sort of almost, like I say, procedurally generate the story as you go, and then you have like a downtime, and then you just start it all up again. And it has all on it kind of almost roguelike mechanics to a certain degree, and also kind of, I think more than any other role-playing game I've seen, you could play it as a game, not a role-playing game.
Yeah.
Like, it almost feels like it could be Darkest Dungeon with pen and paper. And it's fascinating. And so far, one session in, having a blast. Fascinating. Also a big fan of the setting, which is essentially the setting of Dishonored, the video game, because I believe it was originally intended to be a Dishonored role-playing game, and then I think the license was lost or something like that. I could be wrong. I remember reading something about that, so apologies if I'm wrong on that. But yeah,
it's also a very strong parallel, because a friend of mine and I in our group just finished reading the Six of Crows duology with that in Crooked Kingdom, and it is the same thing. It basically takes place in fantasy Amsterdam in about the 1800s, give or take, and it's just about a gang of thieves, each of which with their own specialty and their own deal, and they go on heists and escapades, and now this is all we want to play. So I've been watching the series with like great interest, trying to just grok the rules really closely, because now that's all we want to play.
Yeah, it's really good. I know as well, obviously, that it's expanded out into kind of a meta system called Forged in the Dark, right? Which is like where kit bashes and homebrews and some official ones as well. I literally today was browsing in my friendly local game store, and there was a couple of things. I eventually ended up buying Vaesen, which is the Free League kind of Nordic folk horror game, but I was very tempted by Band of Blades, which is an official release. I don't know if it's also by is it John Harper, the guy who makes John Harper, who made Blades in the Dark.
Hat?
Yeah, Evil Hat is the publisher. Yeah, but I don't know if it's also by him, but it's definitely released by Evil Hat, and it is like a fantasy militaristic version of Blades in the Dark. So you play a group of soldiers fighting like in a massive evil sorceress war, and taking on missions, and then going back to camp and having that cyclical thing. But it can apply to anything. I know there's is it Scum and Villainy is the sci-fi sort of version of it as well. And yeah, what an engine! What a way to tell stories. Yeah.
Didn't you take part in a playtest for like a cyberpunk setting for it or something?
Did, and I cannot remember the name of it. Yeah, I did. Johnny ran that. Johnny, who runs, Johnny, who runs Call of Cthulhu on Monday nights, ran that. I can't remember what it was called, I'm afraid. There we go. So the game designers of Band of Blades, thank you, Steve, is not John Harper. It is Stras Asimovich and John LeBeouf Little. I probably pronounced that wrong. My apologies. Has anyone else been playing anything recently that they'd like to highlight? No? No problem.
For a quarter second about what I'm getting off The Expanse so far.
Yeah, go for it.
So this is based on the Modern Age system, which I believe came from tangentially the Dragon Age role-playing game.
Oh, wow. It's
2d6. It's it has a lot. It feels very 90s. It's got a lot of kind of. It's just large and chunky, and we're so used to kind of. I think Symbaroum being so cut down, and a lot of the games we play here being very, very much smaller affairs. And it's just interesting to come across one of these older books, like picking up Werewolf, the 20th anniversary edition that I was researching for another project, and just seeing these big procedurally clunky systems where like a lot of the book is analyzing specific scenarios to kind of really drive home the fact that you have to pair an ability with an attribute or whatever the specific system's doing, and then it's got like 30 pages of examples of that. I find it quite interesting. I also find it really interesting that the GM section has like about 5 pages on problematic player types and how to address them. Which is
just a general public service that they're doing there.
Yeah, you'll need that when telling tales, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
I think the same thing is I was leafing through the Dragon Age book, which my cousin at my cousin's house today when I was down, and had the same thing. A large section on games mastering tips, which you hardly ever see in books these days, and most of it focused on various arseholes that you meet. And I was like, what's this about? It felt very 2000s.
And again, prepare to have your bridges burned. But like, I think that's something that doesn't get maybe enough in the hobby, because this hobby that we do is so dependent on the interaction with other people.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, it seems one thing, but I think role-playing books could do with more of that. There was also an appendix added to the latest version of Vampire the Masquerade talking about kind of, it wasn't just talking about arseholes in games, it was also talking about like lines and veils and ways to kind of come to that communal agreement of what you should and shouldn't talk about at the table. stuff like that, and I think that's really valuable. I mean, obviously the flip of it though as well, which doesn't kind of work because players don't tend to buy the book, but also I'd like to see section on red flags for GMs that you should not go in there, you should not join their game.
Just snippets from RPG horror stories that are
exactly
just written,
literally
verbatim.
about to reference that. So there we go. Okay, well that's what we've been playing recently, folks. Now we're going to go on to a little section we call the RPG bucket list. And this is things we'd like to get done in RPGs before we inevitably shuffle off this mortal coil, whether that be from hot air balloon accident, or perhaps being torn in half by a kraken, or even just being uploaded into the technological horizon. Today we're going to talk, and I don't know how much of this we'll get through, whether we'll just mention one person's or we'll roll on, but I've got one prepped, even if other people don't. And it's unplayed characters. So either player characters or NPCs that you would really like to play at some point, like whether it's a fully fledged notion or just a generalistic thing. And let me tell you, I grew up in the 90s with hardly anyone to play role-playing games with.
Wait, Matt, did you grow up in the 90s?
I did. I grew up in the 90s. That's after the 80s, but before the 2000s.
That was never made clear.
No, I kind of kept it on the down low, but and hey, my use of the term "on the down low" there marks me out as from the 90s. So, and I created a lot of characters that I've never got to play. I would literally sit in my room and just create characters. And there is one character. I say all this, but this wasn't actually created in the 90s. But there is one character that I've always thought, oh my god, I'd so love to have been able to play that as a player character. It is a character for the storyteller system Aberrant, which is a kind of dark superhero thing, where individuals across the world are granted special powers by the explosion of this satellite, and then it's unclear what they mean, and it completely revitalizes society. It's actually really good and really thinks through what it would be like if superpowered people suddenly arrive. And like the focus isn't just on superheroics, it's on mercenary groups and like an E-channel for them, basically, like called N, because they're called Novas, where they become celebrities and wrestlers, and like this whole spread of things happens. Now, this character was called under his own duress. His Nova name is Bubbles. Bubbles was before becoming superpowered he was a gay club DJ rather than a gay club DJ, but like quite a famous, notorious guy, constantly fighting with the media against his own self-image and trying to get away from kind of gay stereotypes and stuff like that. Now, I don't know how many of you went to clubs in the late 90s, but there's a little thing called foam parties. And essentially at one of these, at like a high, like Ministry of Sound or whatever, he erupted, his Nova powers activated, and he gained kind of the power to kind of change himself into this colossal form of bubbles or fling kind of huge globs like a water cannon. And one of the strengths of Aberrant is you could really create powers and have them work in whatever kind of fashion you wanted. And just this guy who was so sick of not being taken seriously because of his sexuality and because of his career, and then on top of it, he becomes like this cliche gay superhero of being composed of bubbles, and everyone calls him Bubbles. I really, really wanted to play that character.
That poor guy.
No one ever ran Aberrant for me.
This is going to be the end boss in Fetters of Stone, isn't it?
In many ways,
the swamp monster, now it's the bubble monster.
In many ways, I've been surprised at the lack of progressiveness in Free League, in that so far the Simbroom Bestiary does not include enraged gay club DJ.
No. He does seem like tailor-made for City of Mist, which I've always wanted to play. Like, he just seems like he's... I don't know what his his rift would be, but it's like you can make up your own powers there. So
Yeah.
the power of bubbles there, I think, is that's tailor made to bring out there.
Yeah, but I like the kind of thing of it. If it's like, what could bubble? But and then like one of he basically produces this just bubbly water cannon that can drown people. Or I don't know if you've been hit by a water cannon, folks, but it's not for. And like one of the strengths of Aberrant is the ability to build these powers and kind of do whatever you want with them. And the fact that I could even sit down with this system and build a bubble-based super powered individual and go, yeah, I'm really happy with these powers and like what they do and how they work visually and stuff. Great game, great
How
character.
much are we talking, Bubbles? Are we talking like Stay Puft Marshmallow Man? Like
Not like that
kaiju?
big, but like at least the size of like I think I made it so he could become like this sort of 3-story, like sort of semi-shapeless, not like an amorphous mass, like human sort of roughly
Humanoid,
shaped, humanoid-shaped mass of like iridescent congeries of bubbles to get all Lovecraft on you.
I wish I had known this. There was gift ideas for years that we could have
Yeah.
used.
I mean, let's not confuse ourselves. I'm not Bubbles.
That's true. But you clearly like
I do
Bubbles.
really want to. I like Bubbles a lot. And I do want to play him someday. But there we
Fair
go.
enough.
There we go.
Who's
That's
next? Can you top it?
Does anyone else
That's the
got? Yeah,
question.
I don't like. We want to get to our last talking point, but does anyone else want to throw one in the mix, or a couple of other people, or whatever, or we could just move on?
I don't have.
You going to follow that? Yeah.
I think we can't
No
not
one's gonna
move on. I think we
follow
can
that.
move on. Then it's just
I don't-
Matt talks about Bubbles segment, which is totally fine.
We could base an entire podcast around Bubbles.
I do want to say
I-
that I want to maybe bring Matt back towards the shackles of humanity by saying that I too had a folder full of character sheets for characters that never got played, most of which were terrible. And today, actually, I experienced a similar feeling when I finally reorganized my RP stuff folder and folded away all of the games that happened last year and started bulking out the games that are going to happen this year and kind of moved the things that I want to run into different folders. And I feel like I've been transported back to my teenage years, organizing Polly Pockets in the only usable ring binder I had, not being used for any kind of GCSEs, but instead being used to organize fictitious dot people.
Yeah, absolutely. I literally still have my pile of unused character sheets in this house.
I got rid of. I was going to talk about this on our next section, but I recently went through all of my old all of my old childhood role-playing game stuff, which was damaged in a house fire that happened a few years ago at my parents' place, and decided to say goodbye to it, which and chuck it out. But there was a lot of real gems there. All of the character sheets from my teenage years, lots of hand-drawn maps of various dungeons, including the printout. Alex was saying earlier about that kind of thing of new GMs preparing all kinds of notes. The printout of my typed first session that I ever run in Dungeons and Dragons, which was called which was based on it was based upon the Sankator dungeon from Oblivion, which is part of the main quest line, and it was like ripped from that, plus a dragon, plus convincing my best friend to be a plant that would secretly turn on the rest of the party at the end of the story. Everything went wrong, but it was like that was the whole plot. That was it. You played it now, but it is fun going through that old stuff and lots of old character sheets in there.
I did a similar one going through the old stuff, which not damaged by a house fire, but it was in box after box of stuff there. And I would throw out like drawings from my childhood, but I found the folder and I found the graph paper notebook that I had to meticulously lay out all of the character boxes there. And in particular, I found what my mate and I used to do in our English class, which is I had a character who became this he rose from being a local boy done good folk hero to being the head of this particular island there, and all the other nobles from all the islands hated him, and all we did was write back these political letters back and forth in class about how the DM would just shade on my character there, and I'd write back, "I'm fighting for the people, how could you?" And we would just do this for weeks on end to just advance the plot.
I love it.
I have so many of those are so awful. I didn't learn a thing in that class.
I have a friend who runs entire, they're not, I guess they are role-playing, but he has devised an entire game around that kind of thing. He will occasionally just post a map of a fictional continent with like 8 countries, find 8 friends to play each of the countries, and just be like,
Is this diplomacy?
go.
This sounds like diplomacy.
Is this nation states? Does anyone remember that?
Oh, let's not.
I've always figured it was a Hebrew thing, so I don't know if it has a name, but we just have massive
Is this
political plots kicking off over Facebook Messenger.
Is this Sam? So the Sam. Cthulhu Sam.
Sam, as in Ginger Cthulhu Sam,
Jojo.
has been in
Ginger
them.
Cthulhu
He doesn't
Sam.
run them.
Oh, right.
That is a different friend who is also called Sam, which is why I needed to specify it's
There's
Ginger
only
Cthulhu Sam.
there's only Sams and Steves, and occasionally an Alex or two. So this all segues very nicely, folks, into our final talking point, where we're going to talk about the first systems we ever played. And we're going to go on a bit of a tour first. So just briefly talk about them, and then it'll devolve into a mass of people. Like, we'll try and avoid it turning into a Dungeons and Dragons versus White Wolf shit fight. But, you know,
Well,
there's
that's all
only
it's gonna
so
be.
much we can
That
do
day will
about
come,
this.
though.
That day will come. Let me just, I'll drop mine first, and then we'll go around in our clockwise fashion. We'll just quickly talk about what we did. So the first role-playing game, and a couple of you are going to immediately launch at me for this. The first role-playing game I ever did had no system. Yeah, that's
Nice.
right. Yeah, motherfuckers. Indie as fuck right here. No system,
Was that
no
in the 90s?
setting, just pure invention by an 11-year-old genius. I was just sat in... basically, I think I talked about, like, a couple of the kids in my class had known about role-playing games, or I told them about them. And I myself, by that point, owned a role-playing game, which I'll get to in a minute. But as a demonstration of it, I just invented and ran this stupid thing.
Genius.
I can't
Gifted.
remember where I set it or what. I think I may weirdly have named the little village where they were involved in some kind of, like, typical fantasy shenanigans Skara Bray, and I think I did so after the video game The Bard's Tale, which is in itself named after an actual archaeological site in the north of Scotland. But the first proper system I ever played was Advanced Fighting Fantasy. And I had the books, Dungeoneer and Black Sand. It's very old school. Troika is very much based on it mechanically. Just basic fantasy stuff. And that was... so I'm not in the White Wolf group, clearly. But Advanced Fantasy. John, what was your first role-playing game?
So I tried for years to get involved in some kind of role-playing, but all of my friends in school were either not
cool
organized enough or didn't like me enough to involve me in it. So it wasn't until I went to uni and then was involved in like 3 campaigns of different things within almost the same month for each other. But my first actual one was a pre-written story, but I can't remember what the supplement was called, for Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, which was my first
I
experience.
didn't think there was a
role-playing.
4th edition. I had no idea.
No, it went straight from 3.5 to 5.
To 5.
Wow.
Everybody knows that.
I don't remember a 4th edition. I remember a World of Warcraft role.
I remember.
Okay.
Let me tell you, people. As someone who had never done role playing before, it was fine because it was basically like every video game ever, where it's like, here's your basically pre-made character. Assign a couple of points. Do you want to take this skill tree or this skill tree?
Yeah.
Like,
It was a nice idea,
alright,
but
it's
it was poorly executed. My copy of 4th
It was
Ed,
very starter friendly. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
my copy got damaged by chip oil and was completely ruined. and despite the cost, I did not ask the person who damaged them to replace.
Excellent.
It's not that
I would
precious.
I would like to give an honourable mention to my second setting, which was almost the exact opposite. It was a 3.5 setting where I went to the GM's house for character creation, and he handed me 2 volumes of the monster manual and went, "Here, make a character."
That wasn't the one I run, was it?
No.
Wow.
That was a different one.
There we go. So moving on from the mystery, which I never once solved, by the way, of exactly how a 4th Ed book was destroyed by in what is in my head now as a chip fire.
There was no fire involved, but lots of oil.
They were the same event,
but-
obviously.
Sorry, Alex. Fry fire. I should be above the cheap American jokes. I'm sorry.
Honestly.
Where is your spirit of
I'm sorry.
transatlanticism?
That's mean. That's mean. That's
Whose system's next? Who's next
horrible
for the first system?
xenophobia. Steve.
Well, there we go.
Oh,
Hey.
Ooh.
Second Ed? First Ed. Whoa.
First Ed.
First Ed.
Goodness knows. I don't know whether there was one before
I
that.
think you know,
but
Steve.
Free Fatco.
They did
remember it-
loads of.
You
they did
remember
loads
it
of
by
sort
the
of,
rhyme. Second Ed must be read. That's
yeah,
how that
okay,
goes.
yeah. So I was gifted that, and then sort of really didn't play it much for, again, similar reasons, trying to get a group of people together. But did end up getting the DM's guide from Advanced D&D, purely because in the back of it had this great randomly roll dungeon thing, which I just loved. But yeah, so for me again, played bits and pieces, but nothing too grand, until I went to work for a company many years later, where we were all terribly, geeky, and managed to fall into playing again 4th edition. Weird. We must have, found it under a rock or something. But again, because it was so easy to pick up, and because the people I was with
They were on sale, obviously.
They were giving them away by the end.
Was it perhaps a kind of monkey hand situation? Deal with the devil, like you could get a role playing game, but
No, you just got a free
But it's
copy
also
of 4th
cursed.
Ed. You got a free copy of 4th Ed with every copy of Pathfinder.
But it got us going. So then from there we started playing Call of Cthulhu and stuff like that. So and here we are. So it was it did its job.
Did its job, yeah. Stephen, how about you?
Hey, so my first memories of role-playing game was I must have got an old second-hand copy of the AD&D Red Box, which I think is 2nd edition.
It is, yeah.
I had that. I mean, like we kind of.
Second Ed must be read.
Yeah, right. So played around with it. Didn't get very far beyond the tavern. I remember owning the black box as well, from like 91 or something. But I think, there were various sort of sporadic kind of one-shots and stuff of D&D through most of the 90s with kind of different people, but it wasn't really until I went to uni in 2000 when I started playing campaigns, which was White Wolf all the way. Like mostly vampire, but also some werewolf, and a lot of mage, which was good because I like mage.
Good stuff.
But, I was D&D first, but if you push me to fall into a camp, it would be White Wolf.
Yeah, definitely.
But actually, probably
No one-
neither of those.
I was pushing you.
That's good. That's good. So, Justin, how about you?
Yeah, 3.5. Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. That was what I started on in, I don't know when I was like 13, and I played that completely on its own, solidly until I went to university, basically. So that was a good, like a long time, mostly running games, very rarely playing in them, and all of the games universally bad. Like that's the important thing to get across, is that you learn so many lessons learned from just running appallingly bad railroady games. And it really was like the drive to not railroad games anymore that pushed me to try and like pick up more like less like zero prep or low prep games that force you as a GM to stop planning everything, which is one of the things I like most about features of games these days.
Yeah, although obviously on a personal level, I'll have none of this anti-railroad bias as far as I'm concerned. Players are only characters in my novel. So, Alex, what
Cogs
did
in
you
your machine.
Yeah, exactly.
My friend and I were on some like summer retreat, and we found a second-hand copy of like a starter version of First Ed. I don't even know what color the box was. It was a dog-eared thing. Half the instructions were missing. There was like a board, some miniatures, and we found, especially because I wanted to play a wizard who could do like one thing a day, and that was his only we basically invented concepts like cantrips because we're like, this is dumb. Like there's no way we could keep playing like this. And it started a long tradition as we quickly moved into AD&D, second ed, whatever that was, proper second ed, and like infected our high school with players there one by one. We just ensnared them into it, of just messing with the rules whenever it suited us. And we play a ton of games where we just do like rotating DM. So every half hour on the mark, we would swap who was DMing, and they would just continue the story from there and take it in whatever direction they felt like. And we'd run entire, like we'd strip out in Forgotten Realms if we didn't like what was on a particular area there. We're like, yeah, you know what, it's like this. And we gutted the Moonshae Islands and they become something wildly different. We ran this crazy campaign. We'd run like entire arcs with no combat whatsoever. It was all social interaction and sneaking and heists. And so it was just this crazy vehicle. And I almost never DM'd until I hit uni. And then we did 3.5, and I've been forever DM ever since. I like literally every other game I've played short of a few one-shots, I have been stuck with the task, which has been fun, but it's been great in Fetters of Stone to sit back for a change and just be one person.
Yeah, it's funny when you're young and passionate and still have like good things in your life that you have like
those days are long gone.
Things occur to you like that kind of that like exquisite corpse mechanic, right? Of the like changing the DMs every half. That's such a thing that as a teenager you do, and then as an adult you're just like, oh my god, that sounds like so
Get
much
the hell out of my
work.
story, other DMs.
The thing was, it was such a circle of trusting because the people we brought in were people we knew we could trust for those kinds of games and play, and that's why there are these entire breakdowns of how to deal with problem players, because I then met those long after high school, and I'm like, oh god, this is what other people had to put up with. Like, I know. I mean, it was bad.
It's interesting hearing, like, obviously a lot of it sounds like your guys' experiences, maybe not your first experiences, but your formative ones were like role playing at university. I did almost no role playing at university because I met my role playing university society.
Obviously.
I do not want to play games with these people.
Yeah,
you don't. No one does.
No. So, and their relentless hugging and endless Red Dwarf in jokes.
I find that kind of whole thing really insulting. I find that completely insulting. I can't believe you'd say that.
Dear God.
Did you set that
this
up?
may go out as an actual podcast. So
he didn't set that up. I just
listening. I did not set that up. Justin is literally wearing a Red Dwarf shirt, which I knew he owned.
I wear it just
no
to
idea he was wearing. So
I would also like to say, before Matt says anything too insulting about the people you roleplay with in university, Matt is the person that Justin and I roleplayed with in university.
Well, not the only one.
So you were those guys to him. That, like, you were those people to him.
No, he was those people to us.
Oh no,
I met Matt. Matt was running games in a pub. Oh no, he wasn't. He was playing in games in a pub that I worked at, and we pulled John in, and then that, you know, and other people, and that's kind of how we first got together. There you go. That's an exclusive.
I'm definitely too old to have been at university with these two. But yeah, no,
you could have done.
Yeah, okay, yeah,
but you weren't.
You could have been a mature student. No.
Chris,
you're the final piece of this puzzle. What's the first game you ever played?
Belfast in the 90s was a difficult time to cross in the evening.
Fuck me.
But, I'm glad you find the fact that my home city was an actual civil war zone for most of my life.
Of course we don't find that funny, Chris. What we find funny is you leading in with this, where we're like, oh, we had
whimsical tales
on a summer retreat or playing games with our cousin or whatever, and you're like, Belfast in the 90s. Let me tell you
a scene.
Well, it certainly was summer, and there was absolutely some retreating going on. But we ended up going to a friend's house for a surreptitious all-night party, and rolled up they were seasoned veterans, them all being like 14 or 15 years old, and me being a fresh-faced, also 14 or 15 years old, but with no actual friends. We played Vampire all night, and that was the start of my lifelong hatred of the vampire system. Love for the storyteller system, but not
One
vampire
of us.
itself. And and a long number of nice nights doing kind of all-night role-playing sessions.
Lovely. So it was all right in the end. Yeah, it's all fine.
Yeah, the
All
ones who
fine now, right?
the ones who survived
Belfast
had a
all
great
worked out
time. Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah, sure. Well, on that note, yeah. So
A literal bombshell.
literal bombshell. I literally thought you were about to launch into a thing of like how it was super difficult to role play while dodging sniper shots or something.
I mean,
Oh,
yeah,
no.
not in that part of the city.
No,
You have to be in line of sight from Divis to catch the sniper bullets.
So we'll pause a moment while the 5 British people on this stream feel residual guilt. Well, Justin won't.
No. That's the benefit of being middle class.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll. Obviously the thing that leaks out here is that out of this group of 7 of us, 5 of us said D&D. Which I know is something we've talked about on the Discord recently, and about kind of the overwhelming share of the kind of percentage of the role-playing industry that Dungeons and Dragons takes up. Here's an interesting follow-up for everyone. If someone were to start role-playing now, actually 2-part question. Number 1, what system do you wish you'd started with, if you wish it to be any different? And secondly, if you were to start today, or someone you knew and loved were to start today, what would, and I realize that for different people there's different answers, but if you had to pick one system which you hope would be one that would introduce people to the magical world of role-playing, what system would you think that would be? And given that we are here talking about role-playing games, you know who I'm going to go to first? Who I'm going to pick to respond to that first? We'll let the die decide. That's
Whoa.
right, folks. That's right. Hope you're good at thinking on your feet. Justin?
Well, I'd like to say it's the Red Dwarf role-playing game that Sam from Call of Cthulhu Sessions owns and
No,
did try
I
and
own
run.
it.
Oh, John owns
I
it,
ran it.
and would like. And,
We have the quantum whisk gun.
although I have never played it, I hear such good things about Mouse Guard and the kinds of role playing that it engenders. That I think, and it's got that fantasy kick to it. I think Mouse Guard, although again, that's with very little experience of it, merely because big fan of Burning Wheel, where the mechanics come from, and it's much more user friendly than Burning Wheel. It's very accessible. You've got nice, cute little mice. Fantasy setting, but probably encourages lots of good behaviors that you want to nurture to be a fully fledged, grown up, good RPG player.
It's a proper RPG, but it's a very wholesome kind of setting.
And for those reasons, obviously a good one to get kind of younger people into, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that's a good answer. Well,
I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I'll allow it.
You can stay.
So random chance means, of course, that Chris goes next.
I'm still really deeply impressed by how much meat you can get out of Symbaroum for so few rules. And I know maybe I'm like, we were talking earlier about storyteller system stuff and how it's narrative heavy, but I think there's an alluring quality to the systems in storyteller, that there's so many interlocking layers of systems that you go further down the tuning and the synergies, and Symbaroum strips that away to a large extent and gives you just a very small number of kind of matching synergies you can make and characters you can build with that, but really does bring the narrative and put you in that setting. And it's also really simple, like from an actual components you have to roll, because I can't be doing with these massive multi-table games. I'm a big fan in principle of things like Traveller and that kind of thing, but I can't actually play them because there's too much going on. Too much to remember, too many modifiers and stuff you miss that just ends up lost by the wayside. So I do think, actually, as though it's a little bit of a lowball answer, but I think Symbaroum is for me is the one I wish I could give to people who are coming into role-playing gaming.
Yeah, no, I think that's really like, and the thing about Symbaroum as well, like it's very comparable to D&D. Like it's essentially just sort of inverts the D&D system, in terms of the basic die roll mechanic, and also it just I feel like, and this comes from a place, and hands in the air, no surprise to anyone, I'm not a big fan of D&D, but it really takes that D&D style approach and snips away what I'd see as like the fat of D&D, and snips away almost like the gamification of it that I'd see, but uses the same approach of having specific abilities and powers with specific mechanics, but they feel more impactful, and they feel more character driven to me personally. And yeah, I think... Yeah, I agree that Symbaroum is an excellent starter RPG.
I think if D&D was, if you had a greenfield opportunity to rebuild D&D, you'd have a system that looks a lot more like Symbaroum than you would have something that looks like 5th Ed, in my humble opinion.
I agree completely. So, Stephen, how about yourself?
So, in terms of games that I kind of wish that I had been introduced to first, like probably some of the White Wolf stuff, right? Rather than D&D. The reason being, some of the stuff that you mentioned that are like I find D&D just archaic and flabby and complex and just far too focused on kind of combat and dungeon crawling, and like I know that you can tell much bigger, more sophisticated stories with it. But that's kind of what's in the rule book. The reason that I would have picked White Wolf over that as a thing to discover first, aside from the fact that I just like the rule system more, is that in the 90s, where I also come from, White Wolf was what passed for cool in tabletop roleplay circles, right?
No matter what people might say in the D&D versus White Wolf, let me tell you, Stephen is absolutely talking liquid gold truth there.
We were talking about you guys.
It was edgy, and it was kind of anti-authoritarian.
Yeah, and for for that setting of the 90s, also progressive.
For the 90s.
For the 90s.
Had I discovered that in the 90s, I think I might have been able to persuade more people to play with me. Right, like I never got a successful D&D campaign off the ground, so it wasn't until I hit White Wolf that I could really kind of see what that was like, what a kind of story arc kind of unfolding was like. In terms of things I would introduce people to now, I'm in the slightly embarrassing position of having played very, very few tabletop games in the last sort of 10 years. I used to play with Chris when we lived in the same city, but that was a while ago now. And when I moved away from there, like I kind of never settled into a new group. That said, last year, I did introduce a couple of new players to their first tabletop RPG, and we had a whale of a time, and I can thoroughly recommend it. The players in question were 5 and 8 years old, and the system was called Hero Kids, which is a sort of very, very light D&D, very, very simple kind of sort of rule set, and these kind of these pre-canned stories, which do this thing where you can get away with like the most cliched kind of tropes of D&D that would be completely old hat to any kind of adult player, anybody that's read any fantasy. But to kids, like they're experiencing that for the first time. And so you can have the dragon on the treasure hoard, and you can have the unicorn that's been wounded by goblins that needs your help, and like
I think that's something obviously as veterans that it's really easy for us to miss, is that it's so important that these gateway systems exist and that they have access to the tropes, because while we may be bored by tropes do exist for a reason, in that they are narratively satisfying, whether that's in a golden bough hero's journey kind of way or whatever. They've become part of our kind of cultural they are a cultural meme, and therefore like they work. Yeah, and it's so important those games exist. And again, as people who come from the past, mind blown that these days those games exist, because they sure as hell did not when I was growing up. Yeah. So
the idea that I would be teaching a game like that to kids when I was back in the 90s also, implies the presence of like having met a female of the lady variety who could sort of tolerate my presence, which again,
yeah, which obviously
Back in the 90s.
was obviously hammered into us by the culture that wouldn't happen. So there we go. Steve, what about you?
Well, it's a tricky one, because I'll go off with a really boring answer of it really depends for me what the person finds interesting. So for me, it would be, well, if you're interested in space and sort of movies like Alien and so on, then one system that I've seen recently, which is incredibly light but really focused on story and just it seems amazing to me. It's Those Dark Places. The mechanics are dead simple, very, very quick to roll characters, and you can just get straight in and tell a story with it. But equally, if they're not interested in that sort of stuff, then it wouldn't be for them. Fate maybe it's more complex, but you can go anywhere with that in terms of creating if they want to create their own world, their own sort of bespoke RPG, that might be something, but it's more complex. There is one called Quest, which I know some colleagues of mine have found quite good, again, for introducing kids to. I'll stick a link in the private chat there. So there's loads, but really I think if you can match a game to somebody's major interests, that's really gonna
and that is absolutely kind of like 90% of the battle done, right? Like, I imagine a lot of people through the years have got into role play purely through the lore of an IP, essentially, or something. John, how about yourself?
I'm going to go for a slight non-answer, I think, in that I don't think the system, if we were talking about one person who is wanting to get into roleplay games, as opposed to a group who are like, we're all young children and we want to learn to play a game together. If it's just one person who is talking about what sort of thing should I try and go towards, I would say, as long as the system isn't too complicated that you can't follow it, exception if there is one or multiple people in the group who are willing to hold your hand while you learn the system, which is what I had for 3.5. I had two very experienced players who go, no, you add this and then roll this, and then that's it. I would say, other than that, the system doesn't matter. The important things are the setting, so it's what IPs you are passionate about, and it is, for me as a starter, the people that you are role-playing with. Because my experience with starting role-playing games was, as I say, I started playing at university. I was a fresher. I was struggling to make deep connections with new people. And even though D&D was my first game, I didn't really care about D&D because the system was confusing. It was generic fantasy, but it was a social situation where I could be with people that I could hang out with and make jokes about. And I knew that no matter how rough the rest of uni was, every Saturday there would be a few hours where I'd be able to hang out with pretty cool people. So I would say, if you are just getting into role playing, the most important thing is to find a group of people that you feel comfortable telling stories with without feeling too ridiculous, to be willing to put yourself forward. And beyond that, what sort of dice you roll really doesn't matter.
Yes, cool.
Yeah, I mean, you are absolutely right. Format breakingly right. But
sorry,
right nevertheless.
Second to that, I would say whatever IP you are most passionate about, because for me that was vampires.
Red Dwarf.
As soon as I played vampires, I like vampires.
I'm going to kill you.
Like vampires.
So, finally, Alex, shrouded in darkness there.
I haven't had the chance to get up to turn on my light, so you're going to have to deal with me in the dark like a vampire.
It's cool. It's more like
obviously the answer. Obviously, the answer is 4th edition D&D. Best vanilla, just the best system, hands down. So, I had this experience because I had to teach a whole bunch of brand spanking new, grown adults, I should say, whom I worked with, who I would have never thought wanted to play, but during a drunken Christmas party, they all confessed that they had always wanted to, and had to drag them kicking and screaming into it. And so I started with a very stripped down version of D&D that almost worked like Simbarumi. There was just ability scores, no special things, just a handful of spells, a really stripped down combat system, which was good. And it was helpful. And I fully echo John's sentiments there. Like, if you're around good people, you really care less about the mechanics, and it doesn't really matter. All that said, to keep it in format, because I know we're sticklers for that kind of thing, the one I found is most adaptable, that sort of straddles the line really, really well, is the Powered by the Apocalypse system. I really enjoy the kind of flexibility of a handful of specific codified lore-based abilities there, but really everything you want to do is governed by a 2d6 with a little bit of, fudging, and there's a middle ground there, and the game master can sort of add in story beats based on what happens there, so it feels very narratively driven. There's still a mechanic to keep order, which is good, because otherwise I think some systems can get a little too freeform, but I like the simplicity of it. You can, as a DM who does not prepare a lot, it's a really, really great, straightforward way of advancing a story and having narrative plot points and having the players decide what I'm going to do, what risks I'm going to take, and those be very, very clear without a whole bunch of modifiers that don't even make sense until you get the math resolved. I think you could look at the dice immediately and know what just happened, and that's a pretty straightforward system to introduce new people and moving things along quickly into a story and not just a bunch of stats.
Yeah, I think that's yeah. I struggle to add to anything to that, because yes, that is very comprehensive.
Cool. You win.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if anyone's interested, in terms of mine, I've got a kind of cheaty 3-pronged answer to break the format.
Oh, well, come on.
Oh, you can break the format.
GM has his own rules. Rules for thee, not for me.
No, I am going to name 3 systems, though. I am going to kind of. So here's a broad answer to what I wish I'd started with. Same as Stephen, White Wolf. Like, I wish I have that loyalty in my heart, and I know I'm a pretender because I didn't start with it. It's like
You are.
I wasn't born a White Wolf loyalist. I had to adopt it when I was about 14. But the 3 games, and I kind of depend on the audience. But if I had to kind of pick a game for specific audiences, if it was a case of kind of introducing younger people, maybe around the same age I was when I started role-playing to games, I would pick Tales from the Loop. I don't think it's even close. It is a game where you play people of their age group investigating weird things in a humdrum kind of town and setting that just has elements of, if you've seen the TV series, you'll be familiar with it, or seen Simon Stollenhag's excellent artwork. It is exactly the kind of TV show I loved when I was a kid, and the ability to play a character in that world, and the fact that you could transplant it to your city or town. Come on, that's an amazing way to engage young people, I think. If they're adults who are getting to it, I split this in 2 based on how familiar they are with the concept of role-playing and improv and theatre and things like that. If they're a group who are relatively new to that kind of thing, honestly, and I realize I've said this after 1 session, it'd be hard to think of a better thing than Blades in the Dark. The kind of codified game elements of it, the structure of it, the procedural nature of it that allows your character to engage in the world. Honestly, like, even 1 session in, it's hard to think of something that would be an easy pick for that kind of thing. The second one, for people who maybe are more familiar with improv and more comfortable in that area, it's getting to be an oldie now, but it's a classic. It's got to be Fiasco.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's got to be Fiasco. It basically straddles that line between improv and performance and role-playing game. Yeah, it's got to be that. Like, again, no, not even close for anything else for me personally.
It's just a good time, isn't it, Fiasco? Like,
Yeah,
you're going to sit down.
That's all it is. All it is fun. Throws the table over. It was funny because I think
nothing but fun. Where's the substance?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where's the substance? Where are the character sheets? I think Blaze the Dark is is so close to already just being something like Fiasco, which is just.
It is close,
yeah,
but it is more structured. Crucially,
it is,
it depends less on individual improvisation, which is something that is a hell of a thing to put on someone unless they have already experience in that.
It's true.
So that would be my rationale. There we go. That's our first podcast thing, folks. I think we've just about summed that up there. Thank you for watching the first and maybe only Telling Tales TTRPG.
Can we even talk to each other after this?
Oh God, definitely not. I'm still feeling horrible residual imperial guilt for a cheap shot at Alex's nationality. I'd be surprised if he ever talks to me again. So. And quite rightly too. Thank you for watching, everyone. Thank you for participating. If we do another one of these, this isn't like an intended permanent group. Obviously, we've got a bunch of people at Telling Tales. It's going to be like shifting. Maybe your favorite Telling Tales person wasn't on it this time. Maybe they will be next time if we do it. We've got no idea what kind of regularity we'll do these with if we do them again. But if you like this, let us know, and that will increase the chances of it happening again. Yes. If you're interested in other stuff we do, there'll be a bunch of links below, whether you're on Twitch or you're watching this on YouTube. Links to our social media, to where we stream things, to Discord, to Patreon. We run 3 weekly games, Monday through to Wednesday at 8 o'clock BST. We run monthly one-shots on the first Saturday of every month at 3 o'clock BST, and we're currently running a thing over on Free League every other Sunday, again at 3 o'clock BST. That's the Free League Twitch. I won't go into too much detail because we're already running a little late. The only thing I'll promo firmly, because it's coming up this week, is Chris is running a one-shot game of the Expanse RPG this Saturday. That is Saturday the 5th. Yep. Yes. Saturday, the 5th of June, 3 o'clock BST. Come along and watch it. It'll be good fun, especially if you're a fan of The Expanse, right? What could be more fun? Thank you for that, everyone. Thank you for my fellow attempted podcasters, and we'll see you again soon on Telling Tales. Take care, everyone. Stay safe. Goodbye.